Come on in. We have a neighbor that I know that you will be pleased to meet. Her name is Tricia Bushnell, and she is the director of the Midwest Innocence Project. And you say, well, what is that? And we are about to find out. Because the Innocence Project is a nonprofit legal organization that is committed to exonerating wrongly convicted persons. And they do this through the use of DNA testing and reforming the criminal justice system. That's the harder job, to prevent future injustices. And you know, I remember in '92, the Innocence Project was founded. Is that correct? I think it was right around that time.
So that's the Innocence Project in New York. And
yeah.
My organization is a separate
well,
organization.
Well, right, but
yeah.
it came later. But the Innocence Project, there are several branches of the Innocence Project.
They're all independent organizations, so there's an Innocent Network that encapsulates all of them as members. But the actual Innocence Project celebrated its 25th anniversary last year. Yeah.
Well, Barry Scheck came here and spoke. It was before he founded the Innocence Project, but he had just tried the first case where they used DNA and exonerated, I don't even remember what it was. But the University of Missouri at Kansas City School of Law has an annual Joseph Cohen lecture series. And he came and lectured about that case. And he was very articulate. And everybody was just kind of wide-eyed because we didn't know anything about DNA. They hadn't, you know, the science community is developing things all the time, and DNA had just come in. It took forever for the thing to work. I mean, it was not as fast as it is now. They have refined it over the years. But he talked about that, and that was maybe 1990, 91 when he was here. I just can't remember, but it was before the New York Innocence Project was founded. Right. So so many people have been freed because of the Innocence Project. About 350 based on DNA. That's a lot of people that are sitting in jail for a crime they didn't commit.
So it's close. We're getting close to 360 people who are freed of innocent by DNA, right? Not necessarily all of those are by innocence organizations, though. Some people are having testing done by public defenders.
Well, hopefully somebody else is doing something.
Certainly, but you know, that's only the DNA exonerations. If you count all exonerations from 1989, we're looking at about 2,200 people.
That's a
and
lot.
So it's a rate now of about one every 3 days.
And there were many who were on death row.
That's right. The estimates are now about 1 in every 20 people who are on death row are innocent.
And some of them, in fact, most of them have been in jail a long time.
Well, the reality is, since resources are so scarce to do the work, many organizations like my own won't take your case unless you have enough years left. So that's part of why it takes so long, just because we don't have enough people to just start working the cases, and working the case takes so long. So people who have short sentences don't even have that opportunity in reality.
What generated the spark of your commitment to this area of public law?
So I actually got into it by accident.
You know, I have to tell you, that is the story of most of our lives. It's a series of accidents, and that's funny. So what was the accident that caused you to make your commitment? Sure.
So I had originally gone to law school. I'm the first in my family to go to college. My family's from Mexico. I'd wanted to do immigration law. I did what's called a clinic in law school, which is essentially like a residency for doctors, but where lawyers are practicing and law students are representing clients. So I did an immigration clinic. I loved it. And then at my law school, there was a professor, he's still there, named Bryan Stevenson. Many people have heard about him.
He is there where?
At NYU School of
Law.
NYU.
That's where you went?
Yes. And he gave a lecture that he gives every year. It's now a TED Talk. You can Google it. It's amazing. And you feel very motivated, and I wanted to go work with him. And he offered a clinic that he hadn't offered for several years down in Alabama, working on death penalty cases. So I spent the last semester of law school in Alabama working on a case of a man named Emmanuel Gisson-Danner.
And we want to talk about him.
Yeah, and so, you know, I went down there and it turned out the facts of his case were that he was innocent. And so just as a law student, I stumbled into it, and I've been doing it ever since.
But you can't just look at him and say you were innocent. How did you decide he was innocent?
Well, just like in every case, you don't decide, you prove it, right?
Well, right,
So,
but you thought it was worth the proof.
well, you can't make any decision. The reality is beforehand until you find that proof. It's not thinking someone is worth the proof. It is finding the proof and then knowing that something is true. And the reality is, in Mr. Danner's case, like so many other cases, no one ever did the work. So when we got into the case, there were, of course, what are bad facts, things that made him look completely guilty, the things that the court focused on in his appeal. And you read the appeal and you're like, oh, those are horrendous facts. He must be totally guilty. But when we went and met with him, he told us he didn't do it. And we started investigating, actually talking to people, knocking on doors, seeing what evidence there was. And through that, we uncovered that actually somebody else had done it, all of the evidence that showed somebody else had done it that had never before been presented, because nobody ever bothered to do the work.
Isn't that the case, though, in many phases of life? Nobody bothers to do the work, so the good often doesn't get done, whatever it may be.
Well, I think there can be a lot of reasons. I think that there are a lot of doers in the world, and
I
don't want to discount that.
I don't want to discount that. I think you're absolutely right.
I think that, there are a lot of doers. I think the reality is, in any system, particularly if you want to look at the criminal justice system, there is more work than can ever be done, right?
It's awful.
So when you look at a problem that big and you say, it's so monumental, how will I ever make a difference? Some people don't do the work because they think their little part isn't enough. And so part of what we have to do is counteract that so that everyone knows, you doing your gold star standard is actually changing the system.
Well, and you can't do it in large bunches. You have to do it one by one by one by one.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has to play their role.
They do. So I remember when they tried Brown versus Topeka and the Board of Education. The legal department of NAACP had tried cases state by state by state, and they could no longer afford to do that, or did they have the staff to do it? So they knew they had to take it to the federal courts. So something happens, and the Innocence Project was born, and projects come, movements take place. They're just a little slow sometimes, that make things better and can create federal law sometimes that happens, or regional law, or regional looking into somebody's cases. So that's what you do. That's not a volunteer job, and you can make more things happen, it would seem to me.
Well, I think everybody can have a role, and I think even if it is a volunteer job, people have that role. And I think when you think about organizations like mine, they started as volunteer organizations. They started with no staff.
The Innocence Project did start that?
So I want to clarify, we are the Midwest Innocence Project.
Right.
The Innocence Project is out of New York, and it's its own separate organization.
And they're all separate organizations?
We are all entirely different, independently funded and separate organizations.
But with the same general goals?
Well, with the same general goal to exonerate wrongfully convicted people, but some organizations will only do DNA cases, some organizations will only take, with various degrees of that. But we are all completely independently funded and governed, and so that, I just want to be clear when we're talking about what organizations, what we're talking about.
And I think that's important to make that clear, yeah. Because I didn't know that till you had told me. See, I thought they were all connected.
So we are connected under a large network, but the network is sort of a way for us to work together more than it is. And
to exchange information, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But many started as volunteer organizations, and
do you have any volunteers in the Midwest Project?
Oh, we have tons of volunteers in our organization, and people who come in.
What does a volunteer do?
People can do anything. People can do things from, people who have no legal expertise can come in and help scan documents, for example. We're working in paper, we're working in 20-year-old cases, and if I want to review a case, or I want to give a volunteer lawyer the opportunity to help us review that case, it has to get scanned in. So the people help with that, people help with events, people help with our community engagement, but then we also work with lawyers and law students to screen cases, litigate cases together, and help bring people home.
Well, and you also do advocacy. It isn't just freeing the innocent. You do advocacy in that area as well.
Well, we certainly want to prevent wrongful convictions on the front end, right? I would love to work myself out of a job more than anything else.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? It would.
But part of it is the work of litigating allows us to know what needs to be changed. So when we talk about those 360 DNA exonerations, we can say what caused those DNA exonerations, right? What were the what caused those wrongful convictions? We know flawed forensics. We know eyewitness misidentification is one of the leading causes. Eyewitnesses getting it wrong.
What is that? 75%
of DNA exoneration. So if we know that, then how do we change the processes surrounding eyewitness identifications, for example, to prevent that from happening again? And that's exactly what we do. So we worked with social sciences and looked at all the research and said, here are the small changes that cost nothing to implement, and then how do we get it? You know, fortunately, Kansas did pass eyewitness identification reform 2 years ago, but Missouri has yet to follow, even though it costs nothing to do it.
Be a little more specific about witness identification reform.
Sure. So what happens when we are doing an eyewitness ID, when you have someone who's seen a crime and they come in, there are ways that you want to do it to reduce it from bias. So for example, I want to make sure that everyone who's in the photo lineup, like people think of, looks like the description provided by the witness. What sometimes happens is they're wildly disparate, only one person matches the description, right? Or they all match what the suspect looks like and none of them match the description. So we want to make sure they match the description on the very basic level. The person who's giving you the lineup, if I'm going to show it to you, I should have no idea who the suspect is. So I cannot influence you, even non-verbally, into it being you picking the wrong person. And I need to say to you, you know, the individual may not be in here, and the investigation will continue regardless of whether you make an identification. So getting rid of some of those biases that you have to pick someone and maybe the person's in there. And then
or that you know which one is right and you don't want to pick that one and you pick another one.
Well, I mean,
that happens too, I bet you.
We're generally less worried about that.
Are you?
But and then the other issues that, you know, we want to ask them how confident they are that that's the person at the time. Because actually what we found about memory is confidence grows over time, even though you may have been not confident at the time that you
It's like your mother's chicken soup gets better with the age.
Exactly like that, right? Memory is a funny thing. So, and the last thing that we try to do is also say, you should look at them one at a time versus all together. So what we can do is if I'm giving you the lineup, I put every picture in a different folder, shuffle them all up, and hand them to you one at a time to look at. Because what we end up doing is comparing the different people. And we'll say, it looks more like number 2, more like number 3. And when we do that, we're actually just trying to find the closest versus the actual person.
Yeah. Oh, that's tough, I would have to say. The average number of years I read where some of these people have spent in prison is 14. 14 years, that's a long time. And some have spent 25 or 30 years. And as you say, if they have spent too much time and don't have much time left, then it's difficult to pick them to spend several years trying to get the job done, which they may not have because of age, because of health, because of time left in prison.
So it's less a concern of because of their age, they don't have time left, but more of if they are going to be released in 3 years. For example, let's say they're going to be released and they're not going to be on probation or parole. If you are not in the custody of the state, I cannot challenge your conviction. So if your sentence has been completely finished, we cannot challenge your conviction.
In other words,
in
you
courts.
have to be incarcerated.
Or on probation or parole, somehow in the custody of the state. And so when somebody is completely finished with the sentence, the only option to them is what's called clemency, so the governor giving them a pardon.
Yeah.
And that is also incredibly difficult, right?
That is very difficult. Well, you have said you wonder sometimes why people don't do things. And then you wonder further, when has the state made enough mistakes when we don't let them do it anymore? And I think the operative phrase is when we don't let them do it anymore. And we speak with our votes, with our voices, and with our commitments.
Absolutely, and demanding change.
Do you find that that's happening more or less or not at all? Or
I think that people are certainly more aware of these issues than they were 25 years ago, as you mentioned, when the Innocence Project was founded. I think, you know, when I was in law school, I didn't know that this was something people could do, and now law students come up and they say this is the only thing they want to do, right? That's why they're going to law school. So it's certainly becoming more and more understood. And if I had when I talked to people when I was a law student and I said, oh, this man's innocent, and he's convicted and sentenced to death, they would never have believed that, right?
And they really don't care.
Well, they just wouldn't have believed it was possible. And now people are like, oh, I just heard about somebody on the news 3 days ago, right? So that is changing, and that is creating things. The difference is, I think we have an obligation to educate people in how they can make a difference. And again, this huge system that seems so daunting. And some of it is exactly as you're saying, voting. But it can't be enough to just say vote. It has to be enough to say, what should you care about when you vote? And if you care about justice, one of the big things I think people need to know is your prosecutor decides what justice is, and your prosecutor is elected. Do you even know who your prosecutor is?
Probably
and what
not.
questions are you asking your prosecutor when they are up for re-election? Really important, simple things, because they decide it not only in who gets charged and who doesn't, and whether or not they're going to agree to someone getting released. They also create policy in the legislature, right?
Well, Jean Peters Baker is in the news quite a bit, and she does create policy. She's active as a prosecutor. She's a Kansas City prosecutor.
She is a Kansas City prosecutor, and I have a Kansas City client who is not yet released, even though that crime is completely solved. We know who did it, and our client was at the sheriff's department at the time of the crime getting a gun permit.
Let me ask you this. Have you changed your opinion of these people that you represent over the years that you have been representing them, or was your opinion pretty well set? Were you judgmental? Are you judgmental now? Have you changed how you look at them?
I think that the reason that folks get incarcerated for crimes they didn't commit is because people judge them to begin with. I don't know that, I mean, I think that the only way that I got into this work is by approaching things with extreme skepticism, right? I need to know what is true and what is not true, and I only believe what is provable. And in that regard, I have always approached it from day one with Mr. Gissendanner with, I trust my clients, but I have to verify it, right? So I think that that's some of the problem, is people have decided the outcome and then found the evidence to support that outcome versus just seeing what the evidence supports.
And a good lawyer follows the evidence for a legal and honest outcome.
Well, I mean, different actors in the legal system have different roles, right? So the prosecutor is a minister of justice, and their obligation is to find justice. Now, a defense attorney has a different role. They may represent a guilty client, and their obligation isn't to find a justice that way, right? Their obligation, ethical obligation, is to do the best that they can for that client. And so, you know, I think it's important to remind people of what those individual roles are at any given moment.
And that's part of your job, I think.
Well, we sit sort of in a weird outside the box position, right? So I'm not a defense attorney in the typical sense where I just I represent any defendant who comes in. I don't represent people who are guilty, and that is very different than what it is to be a public defender or
right.
And in that same regard, I have also proven people guilty, not only people who've applied, but I've found real perpetrators, right? So it's this weird, just a different place to sit in.
Kind of straddling the fence
Yeah.
a little bit, yeah.
Exactly.
You know, we're talking about how many years some of these people who are innocent have spent in prison. And many states do have remuneration, financial monetary remuneration for the years that they've spent in prison. And I read about a case, his name is Barry Gibbs. He was found innocent. The city of New York awarded him $9.9 million and the state of New York $1.9 million. This happened in 2010. That's a little bit more than some of the states. There are, the federal government in 27 states plus the District of Columbia have policies that they remunerate innocent, people found innocent.
Well, I believe Mr. Gibbs was a civil case, which can happen in any state. So you can say that...
So he was different then?
There's a difference between compensation from the state and then suing under what's called a 1983 claim to be compensated based on the bad actions of state or federal actors, right?
So he doesn't fit really right into your mold that you're involved in at the moment.
Well, so, I mean, I just want to finish clarifying, so I think it will help people. You know, compensation, as the way you're talking about it, means that a state is saying if someone has been wrongfully convicted, regardless of whether or not there was malfeasance in them doing that, we are going to begin to make them whole by compensating them for the time they spent in prison. And so, as you mentioned, it was recently all but 17 states, now it's all but 16 because Kansas just joined, provide some form of compensation, though some are abysmally bad and some
And
are
these are
really
not
bad.
in civil cases.
Those are not civil cases.
Okay.
These are just saying we are going to start to do something to make people whole. Outside of that, defendants where there has been some extreme misconduct can sue. And they can sue in the state or federal system and say these folks acted and did things that are so outside what they're allowed to do that I should receive damages for it. I believe that that's what happened, Mr. Gibbs. I can't be positive, but based on those numbers, I would believe that.
You think that's what happened?
Ryan Ferguson received an $11 million settlement in Missouri recently. Eddie Lowry got $7.8 million in Kansas.
And those were civil suits.
Those were all civil suits. So Eddie Lowry, for example, had received, as I said, $7.8 million in Kansas, but he didn't receive it just under a state compensation law.
I see.
Yeah.
Is there a state compensation law in Kansas for other than civil suits?
So there now is. As of literally last Tuesday, the governor signed the bill into law. It provides $65,000 per year for every year that someone spent wrongfully convicted. It allows for tuition assistance and waivers so that folks can go to either vocational school or college, and provides some
in addition to the $65,000?
In addition to the $65,000, financial literacy training, some mental health services, and a short period of time of being able to be on the health insurance rolls for the state. And so that is an incredibly strong way of saying we want to help people be whole when they come out.
Is there any grandfather clause in that, or is that as of the day the bill was signed and forward?
So anyone who qualifies underneath it has a 2-year period from the day it was signed to apply and get that compensation.
So you can go back 2 years?
No,
that's
anyone can do it, but you only have 2 years to get in.
No, I understand, but let's assume that you were wrongfully convicted 3 years ago.
Right.
So they are not eligible.
They are eligible.
They are.
Anyone can apply.
Anyone.
It's just you only have 2 years from the date of the signature to get in and make that
So if
application.
it happened more than 2 years ago?
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I think it's worth it to go over the reasons for wrongful convictions because I think it's kind of interesting. 75% of the wrongful convictions are for false eyewitness identification. I think I saw it.
So that's DNA exonerations only. So the numbers are a little bit different when you look at DNA
Yes,
exonerations.
I'm only talking about DNA now.
Right, but I'm just clarifying
Yeah,
for folks
yeah.
who may be learning
But
about it.
that's a lot.
It is. People get it wrong. Our brains are not as solid as we'd like to believe. And I think this recent Yanni Laurel thing that everyone's talking about is a great example of that, right? Some people say they're hearing somebody say Laurel, some people say they're hearing somebody say Yanni, but if I had to make you make an identification based on that, which we do, you could be completely wrong, right? And so it's just an interesting thing about how differently we can interpret something that is factually what it is, but we interpret it differently.
Let's talk about improper or unreliable forensic science. What does that mean to you?
So it means a lot of things. The first thing I would say is of the forensic sciences, the only piece that we think about traditionally that has been validated in the scientific method is DNA. So everything else that we think about, fingerprints, tread marks, ballistics, when you think about bullets being fired, microscopic hair analysis, all of those things are things that were born and invented by law enforcement to make these discoveries. Now, that doesn't mean they're not useful, but it means they have extreme limits of science, and we've actually gone outside the limits of science and testified in court to the opposite. An example would be microscopic hair comparison. So if I find a hair from a crime scene and I compare it to somebody's hair on their head, what they would do is they would look under a microscope, and this is what all of those things are. Fingerprints, if you think about it, right? Bullets. It's looking at them under microscopes and saying, are they the same or not? So what they said was, this hair must have come from you. But they can't say that. What science says they could say is, this hair could not have come from you, but not that it must have. And they used to say that. And what we learned from science and from DNA exoneration since then is how wrong it was. So recently, around 2013, the FBI and the Department of Justice decided to look just at the FBI's hair comparison cases. And they looked at the testimony in every federal case that they had, and they found a 93% error rate. which means 93% of the time, people were testifying and saying outside the bounds of science that it must have matched someone to the exclusion of all others. And that's part of the problem. A lot of these forensics aren't validated, and so until they are, we shouldn't be saying that. We should be able to say could not come from, but not it must have.
So it's a null hypothesis rather than a positive, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And we also talk about government misconduct, inadequate legal counsel, and improper use of informants. Those are three interesting, and of course the percentage is much less, but it's still there.
Well, and it varies by, like I said, by DNA versus non-DNA. And the other thing to think about is you can have multiple parts of this in an exoneration. So ineffective counsel, right? So you had a lawyer who didn't do their job. It is pretty common across all of these cases. And I think about that when we think about the fact that in Missouri is ranked 49th in the country for funding of public defenders. So what kind of counsel are they going to be getting?
Probably
right?
people that aren't very well versed in
or who don't have time. They don't have time to go knock on these doors and talk to all these witnesses and find out what happened. And so they don't. And people get convicted for things they didn't do.
It's tough. It really is. So what do you hope for in your time to come in the arena of the public law that you have chosen, the Innocence Project? What would you like, if you could have any wish you wanted in this area, what would you wish for?
I mean, there's so many things.
Well, you can have two if you like.
I mean, one would be funding for defense. And there's a different way to, people talk about this and have asked, well, what if there's no money? Then my response is, then we have to have parity in the funding for the defense and the prosecutor. If there's no money for the defense, then we should cut the prosecutor's funding to match
And where do you get your money?
Well, my organization gets our money from donations. We are entirely donation funded.
That's tough.
But I'm talking just even in the criminal justice system to prevent it before it even comes to us, then let's have parity in the system. So if the prosecutor has equal funding as the defense, then they can't charge as many cases, and then we'll have to go through things. So that's one option. The other thing that's really important to me that is not going to happen anytime soon, but we live in a system where technicalities are what keep people out of court. My clients cannot get into court because of the crazy rules on when you can file. They've all missed their deadlines. You only get one appeal. People didn't do it right. All of those keep their claims out, even if the evidence says they're innocent. Now, we can get them back in if the evidence says they're actually innocent, but they still have to have a constitutional claim. You cannot just say, I'm actually innocent and be let out of prison in the federal system right now. So that's one change. But more than that, I would just hope that instead of saying you missed your time, you missed your whatever, we would just look at the merits of a case and say, is there merit here? Versus spending just as much money to argue about whether or not they're timely or not. And that's what we do.
It's true. And I have to say thank you so much, Tricia Bushnell, for coming. And she says what she does is all-consuming. And she also says she sees the best in humanity and the worst in humanity, but still, she looks for the merits of the case. Thanks, Tricia.
Thank you.
The Innocence Project is wonderful. Keep on going. And thank you for coming. And I know lots of things I didn't know before, so thank you so much. And thanks for being with us. It's our neighborhood and our community. We'll see you again soon.